My parents charged me $500 to eat Christmas dinner while my brother ate for free. He's the golden child, Mom chuckled. I paid. Then I called the landlord of the house they rent from me. Activate the eviction plan. 20 minutes later, the envelope was sitting next to my dinner plate. A regular white envelope, the kind you use for birthday cards or electric bills. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting. And for one stupid second, I thought it was a Christmas card. I actually smiled. Then I opened it. Inside was a printed invoice. Header, line items, total at the bottom. $500. For Christmas dinner. My own mother had invoiced me for Christmas dinner while my brother Derek sat across the table eating his roast beef completely free of charge. Not a single word said to him. Not so much as a guilty look thrown his way. And my mother was watching me read it. She was watching me with this patient little half smile, the way you watch a child work out a puzzle you already know the answer to. I want to tell you that I flipped the table. I want to tell you I said something devastating and walked out into the cold and never looked back. But I didn't. I sat there with that paper in my hands, and I reached into my purse, and I paid her. And then I went home, and I made a phone call that changed everything. My name is Kara, and I am 33 years old. I run the overnight shift at a regional distribution warehouse outside of Clarton, which is a town of about 14,000 people in the flattest part of Ohio you have ever seen in your life. I have been doing that job for 9 years, and I am good at it. I started as a loader, moved to inventory, and now I manage a crew of 22 people, and I know every pallet position in that building by memory. I am not glamorous. I drive a 4-year-old pickup truck, and I cut my own hair more often than I should. I have a cat named Biscuit, and a small house I bought when I was 26, and a savings account I built the way you build a wall, one brick at a time, every single week without fail. I am telling you all of that because the thing about my family is this. My family looks at me and sees nothing. They always have. Derek is 31. Derek has never held a steady job for longer than about 14 months at a stretch. Derek has borrowed money from my parents so many times that my mother stopped calling it borrowing years ago and just started calling it help. Derek is charming and loud, and he fills whatever room he walks into, and my mother watches him the way sunflowers watch the sun. She has always watched him that way. Even when we were kids, even when I was bringing home straight A's, and Derek was failing gym class. The focus in that house was always on him. His struggles. His potential. His feelings. My dad, Ron, is a quiet man who learned a long time ago that agreeing with my mother cost less energy than the alternative. He is not cruel. He is just absent in the way that a piece of furniture in a familiar room is absent. You stop seeing it. It stops doing anything except take up space. I moved out when I was 19 and I put myself through 2 years of community college on nights and weekends while I worked at the warehouse. I never asked my parents for a single dollar. I want to be very clear about that. Not $1. When I bought my house, I did it on my own savings and a mortgage I qualified for based on my own credit. My parents came to see the house exactly once, and my mother said the kitchen was small and my dad said he thought the neighborhood might flood. That was 7 years ago. About 3 years after I bought my own place, my parents started having trouble with rent. They were living in a house on Birchwood Court, a 2-bedroom ranch that belonged to a landlord named Phil Gaston. Phil was old-fashioned and he liked my parents because they had been there for years. But Phil died in the spring of that year and his son inherited the property and immediately put it on the market. My parents panicked. My mother called me, which she almost never does unless she needs something. She cried. She said they had nowhere to go. She said she and my father were too old to start over and that Derek was in a difficult season of his life, which apparently was a reason why I needed to solve the problem, even though Derek was a grown adult man and not a child having a difficult season at school. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I did the math carefully, the way I do everything, and then I went and I bought the house on Birchwood Court myself. I paid slightly over asking because there were 2 other interested buyers and I needed to move fast. I became the landlord of my parents' home. I set their rent at $400 a month below what I could have gotten from a stranger on the market, because they were my parents and because some part of me still believed that meant something. I did not tell them what the market rate was. I did not hold it over them, I just sent them a new lease and they signed it. My mother thanked me once, briefly over the phone. Then she went back to mostly calling me when she needed something. I managed that property for 4 years, handled every repair call, got the furnace replaced in year 2, replaced the water heater, fixed the back fence twice, paid the property taxes, handled the insurance, dealt with everything that came up. $400 below market rate every single month for 4 years. I want you to hold that number in your head, because I want you to understand that when I sat down at their Christmas dinner table and found an invoice for $500 next to my plate, I was the landlord. I was the reason they had a house to eat Christmas dinner in, at all. Now let me tell you about that dinner. It was the 23rd of December, because we always did our family Christmas dinner a day or two early so my parents could have Christmas Day free. Derek had driven in from Columbus. He was in the middle of some new venture. Something about app development, which he had explained enthusiastically on his way in, and which my mother had listened to with wide, bright eyes like he was describing a moon landing. I had driven in from Clarton after my shift, and I smelled like the warehouse, and my back hurt. The food was good. My mother is a genuinely excellent cook, and I have never disputed that. There was prime rib and roasted potatoes and green beans and a sweet potato casserole that I used to love as a child. I was already seated when Derek came in, and my mother immediately got up to hug him and take his coat and ask if he was hungry, and tell him he looked thin. She did not hug me when I arrived. She told me there was a hook for my jacket by the door. We ate. It was the usual pattern, which is Derek talking, and my parents listening, and me existing in the background, present enough that no one could be accused of excluding me, but invisible enough that I might as well have been a chair. My father asked me how work was going. I said fine. That was the extent of it. Then my mother asked me to help her clear the plates, which I did, and when I came back to the table there was the envelope, my name in her handwriting. I thought it was a card. It was not a card. I read every line on that invoice. Itemized: roast beef, potatoes, sides, holiday ambiance, which I want to pause on for a second because my mother had listed holiday ambiance as a line item and charged me $40 for it. There was a subtotal, there was tax calculated on the subtotal. And then there was a final total, $500.12, though she had rounded it to 500 even, which I suppose was a gesture of generosity. I looked up from the paper. Derek was leaning back in his chair picking at a dinner roll. He had not been handed an envelope. My father was staring at the centerpiece. My mother was watching me with that patient half smile. I said, "Mom, is Derek getting one of these?" My mother laughed. Actually laughed, a light little chuckle, comfortable and completely unbothered. She said, "Oh, honey, he's the golden child." I want you to hear how she said it. Not like it was a slip, not like it was a joke she immediately regretted. She said it the way you state a known fact. The sky is blue. Water is wet. He's the golden child. I looked at Derek. Derek shrugged one shoulder and broke off a piece of the dinner roll and ate it. He did not look at me. My father suddenly found something fascinating about his water glass. I opened my purse. I took out $500. I put it on the table next to my plate. I folded my napkin and set it on the invoice. I said the food was wonderful, which it was, because I am not a liar. And then I put on my jacket and I drove home. I cried for about 20 minutes on the way back, and then I stopped, because there was a point where crying felt like giving them something I didn't want them to have. Then I drove in silence for the rest of the way home. When I got inside, Biscuit was sitting on the kitchen counter, looking at me like he always does, with that specific cat expression that implies he finds everything about you slightly disappointing, but is willing to tolerate your presence. I made tea. I sat down at my kitchen table. I stayed there for a long time. The thing about growing up invisible is that you develop this very particular internal stillness. Most people, when something bad happens, they feel it and it moves through them like a storm. For me, it is more like the thing settles into me slowly, layer by layer, the way sediment settles in still water. I sat with $500 and he's the golden child, until both of those things had settled all the way down to the bottom of me. And once they were down there, resting on everything else that had already settled over the years, I started thinking very clearly. I thought about 4 years of below market rent, about the furnace and the water heater and the fence and every repair call I had answered and every property tax payment and every insurance renewal. I thought about what the market rate for a 2-bedroom ranch on Birchwood Court actually was, and what $400 less than that added up to across 4 years. And then I thought about the fact that somewhere in my filing cabinet there was a lease agreement, with my name on it, and a clause I had added on the advice of the attorney who drew it up, a clause that I had never used and had honestly never expected to use. I called the clause the eviction plan. I had put it there because the attorney said it was standard and because I was buying a property and I needed to protect the investment. It was never supposed to be anything except words on a page. I got up and I went to my filing cabinet. I took out the folder for the Birchwood property. I read every page. The lease, the renewal agreement, the addendum from year 2 when we had updated the terms. And yes, right there, on page 4 of the original agreement, the clause was exactly where I had left it. It outlined a specific process for what the attorney had called a formalized vacancy demand. It gave the tenant a fixed number of days from notice. It was all legal, all proper, all put together by a professional I had paid for exactly this purpose. I also remembered something my parents did not know. After 4 years at below market rate, the lease had shifted to a month-to-month agreement. month to month, no fixed term to honor. 30 days notice in writing, and the clock started ticking. I made a list. I had a property manager. His name was Gerald Finch, a former city housing inspector who now managed a small portfolio of residential rentals in the county, including mine. Gerald and I had a good working relationship built on the fact that I was organized, I paid my bills on time, and I did not call him about things I could handle myself. He had told me more than once that I was his easiest client. Gerald answered his phone during business hours. He was thorough, and he was not sentimental. I did not call Gerald that night. I sat with my list and my folder and my tea for another hour. Then I went to sleep, because I needed to think clearly, and grief is terrible for thinking clearly. I slept for 9 hours, which was unusual for me. When I woke up, I felt the specific kind of calm that comes after you have already made a decision, and all you have left to do is carry it out. Then I addressed a completely separate matter, because while I was planning the serious thing, something else had been quietly taking shape in the back of my mind, and it needed to be handled first. Derek had been talking at dinner about a big meeting he had coming up in the new year. A potential investor. He had been very proud of himself about it. He had described this meeting about 3 times across the course of dinner, and each time my mother had added one more superlative to her encouragement. I had sat there and listened to all of it and filed it away. I made a call. I will not tell you the name of the company. They are a small entertainment and event services business, and they deserve their privacy. What I will tell you is that they offer what they describe as custom experiential greetings, which is a very professional way to say they will send a costumed performer to any address you specify to deliver a personalized message of your choosing. I selected a specific package. The package involved a large number of bright yellow balloons. It involved a banner, and it involved a person in a full rhinestone-covered king costume, crown and all, carrying a gold-painted scepter, who would arrive at the specified location and announce loudly and in front of everyone present that he had been sent by the family to honor the one and only golden child Derek. On the occasion of his very important meeting, the banner would read, in letters large enough to read from the back of a room, "Congratulations, golden child." The king would then produce, from a velvet bag, a participation trophy. A real participation trophy, the kind from a trophy shop, with a little plastic figure on top engraved with Derek's full name and the words "Most Special Boy, Eternally." I have thought about the moment that performer walked into Derek's meeting many times. I was not there. But Derek's girlfriend at the time, a woman named Priya, who I had always genuinely liked, texted me about 2 hours after it happened. She said, and I want to be precise here because she was very specific, that Derek had turned the color of a tomato so fast it looked like someone had switched a setting. She said the investor had initially seemed confused and then had laughed so hard he had to excuse himself. She said Derek had tried to explain that it was a mistake, and the king had said, very professionally, that he was instructed to stay for the full 15 minutes per the booking agreement. She said Derek spent those 15 minutes standing next to a velvet-robed king and a participation trophy, while his potential investor composed himself in the hallway. Priya said she had not booked it, but she wished she had. I read that text at my kitchen table, and I laughed for a solid 4 minutes, and then I pulled myself together because I still had serious work to do. I called Gerald Finch on a Thursday morning. He picked up on the second ring, which is very Gerald. "Kara," he said. "Happy New Year. Everything all right on Birchwood?" I said, "Gerald, I need you to activate the eviction plan." There was a pause. Not a long one. Gerald has been doing this for a long time. He said, "You're sure?" I said, "I am sure." He asked if there was a specific issue because documentation helps. I said yes. I told him that my parents had been consistently renting below market rate and that I had recently been charged $500 to eat Christmas dinner while my status as their landlord and the person subsidizing their housing went entirely unacknowledged. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is also very Gerald. Then he said he was sorry to hear that and that he would get the paperwork started. I said, "Gerald, how quickly can you have something sent?" He said he could have a formal notice of vacancy demand in certified mail by end of day. Certified mail moves fast when the sender is organized and the mailing address is on file. Gerald was organized. The address was on file. 20 minutes later, Gerald called me back. He said the notice was drafted, signed, and at the post office. Certified, return receipt requested. 20 minutes. That was all it took to put 30 days on the clock for the house on Birchwood Court. I want to tell you what happened in those 30 days, because it did not unfold the way you might expect. The certified letter arrived at my parents' house on a Saturday. My mother called me approximately 4 minutes after I imagined she signed for it. I did not answer. She called again and again. She left a voicemail that started confused and ended very angry. She said there had to be a mistake. She said I needed to call her back immediately. She said things that I am choosing not to repeat because they say more about her than they do about me. My father called next. His message was quieter. He said he thought there might have been some kind of mix-up and he hoped I was doing okay and that maybe we could talk. Derek called last. Derek's message was 6 minutes long. He used the word unfair approximately 11 times. He pointed out that he was in a difficult season. He said family does not do this to family. He said I was being vindictive, a word he pronounced with the emphasis on the wrong syllable, which I noticed because I notice things. I did not call any of them back that day. I called my father back the following Tuesday because he was the one who had used the word mix-up and I wanted to be clear with him that there was no mix-up. Dad, I said, the lease converted to month 14 months ago. Gerald confirmed the notice is valid. I need you to understand that this is real. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Kara, your mother didn't mean anything by the invoice. It was just, I said, what? What was it? He didn't have an answer for that. I said, Dad, I have been your landlord for 4 years. I have charged you $400 a month below market rate. I replaced the furnace. I replaced the water heater. I fixed the back fence twice. I have subsidized your housing because you are my parents and because I believed that meant something. And she handed me an invoice for Christmas dinner and told me Derek didn't have to pay because he's the golden child. And she laughed. My father said nothing for a while. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, I know. Just those 2 words. I know. Not I'm sorry. Not she was wrong. Not you deserve better. Just, I know. But there was something in how he said it that wasn't nothing. It was the sound of a man who had known for a long time and had chosen the path of least resistance for so long that he wasn't sure anymore where the path had taken him. I said, Dad, you have 30 days. Gerald will work with you on logistics if you need help understanding the next steps. I hung up. My mother sent me a series of text messages over the following 2 weeks. They moved through several stages. First came the denial, then came the anger, then came something that looked like bargaining. She wrote things like, you know we love you, and also things like, I cannot believe you would do this to your own family, which I found interesting since she had not mentioned family when she handed me the invoice. She wrote that Derek would be devastated. I thought about Derek's participation trophy and I felt fine. In week 3, something shifted. My mother called me on a Wednesday evening and she sounded different. Tired, a little smaller than usual. She said she wanted to understand what she had done wrong. I said, Mom, you charged me $500 to eat Christmas dinner. You told me Derek didn't have to pay because he's the golden child. And you laughed. She said, I thought you would understand it was a joke. I said, I paid you. She went quiet. I said, a joke is something both people find funny. I sat at your table and I paid you $500 in cash and I went home. That is not the ending of a joke. She said, I didn't know it hurt you that much. And I had to sit with that for a second, because I think she actually meant it. I think my mother had spent so many years not seeing me that she had genuinely stopped registering the idea that I could be hurt. I had been so quiet for so long about all of it that my silence had become invisible to her, part of the background, like furniture. I said, I know you didn't know. That's the whole problem, Mom. She started to cry. My mother cries easily, and I have learned to let it happen without reorganizing my feelings around it. I stayed on the phone. I let her finish. Then I said that I would give her an additional 30 days to make arrangements, because I was not trying to put them on the street. I was trying to draw a line, and the line was now drawn. She asked if I would ever forgive her. I said that forgiveness was a process, not an event, and that we would have to see. I meant that. What happened next took longer than 30 days, and it was not linear, and it was not clean. My parents found a rental 2 towns over, a place they found through a church connection, a little bit smaller than Birchwood, but fine. Perfectly adequate. My father seemed almost relieved, which surprised me. He helped my mother pack without complaint. He called me once during that time to say he thought I had done the right thing and then immediately said, Don't tell your mother I said that. I told him I wouldn't. Derek did not speak to me for almost 2 months. When he finally reached out, it was a text message that said, I hope you're happy. I wrote back, getting there, and left it at that. His investor, as it turned out, had found the Golden Child tribute deeply funny and had actually gone ahead with a smaller version of the deal he had been considering, apparently on the basis that anyone whose family had that kind of sense of humor was worth knowing. Derek told me that part himself, eventually, months later, when things had softened enough that he could tell it as a story. He was still embarrassed, but he told it, and somewhere in the telling, something shifted, because he looked at me differently after that. Like maybe I was a real person. Like maybe I had been there all along and he just hadn't looked. My mother and I talk on the phone now about once a month. It is not warm exactly. It is honest, which is something it never was before. She does not invoice me for things. She does not chuckle about golden children. There is a careful quality to our conversations, the way there is a careful quality to walking on ice. We are both watching our step. I do not know what is on the other side of the ice. Maybe nothing. My dad calls me sometimes to ask about the cat. He likes Biscuit. He says Biscuit has integrity. I think he means it as a compliment to both of us. Gerald sent me a card on the anniversary of the Birchwood purchase. It said simply, "Well managed." I put it on my refrigerator. I still drive my 4-year-old truck. I still cut my own hair more often than I should. I still know every pallet position in a warehouse from memory. I still sit at my kitchen table late at night sometimes, with my tea, going over the ledger of what things cost and what they were worth. $500 bought me a lot of clarity. It bought me the knowledge that I had been subsidizing people who didn't see me for years. It bought me the knowledge that I was capable of acting on that clearly and without cruelty. It bought me the look on Derek's face when a Rhinestone King handed him a most special boy trophy in front of a potential investor, which is a thing I can revisit in my mind whenever I need to, and it never fails me. And it bought me something quieter than all of that. Something I am still getting used to, which is the feeling of being a person who takes up her full amount of space. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. Just real. Just here. I am my own golden child now. I figured out I always was.